Hello, I'm Philip Booth, Editorial and Programme Director at the Institute of Economic Affairs and Professor of Insurance and Risk Management at Cass Business School. And I'm also editor of this book, Catholic Social Teaching and the Market Economy, which can be downloaded from the IEA website. I want to spend a few minutes talking about that book. Rather than summarise the book, I just want to mention a few underlying and implicit themes. The motivation for the book was that the authors, who are all Catholic economists or theologians, believed that there was too much confidence within the Western Christian establishment in the power of government to solve economic and social problems. In the analysis of problems that concern Christians, such as poverty, homelessness, underdevelopment in the Third World, there is too much bad economics and often, in fact, bad theology. Now, Christians often use the phrases solidarity and subsidiarity to describe the extent to which a free market economy should be balanced by government intervention in the economic sphere. And the authors argue that many Christian commentators on economic issues in the Anglosphere do not take full account of the principle of subsidiarity. But perhaps a greater problem, argue the authors, is a serious misconception of the nature of solidarity. If one reads Vatican statements that use the word solidarity, only infrequently, in fact, is the word used to indicate the pursuit of ends through the political system. In other words, government action to help the poor, the homeless, and others who may be in need. Even then, government action is viewed as a last resort to be used only when the temporary circumstances that make it necessary continue to exist, as the Church herself puts it. Solidarity, in fact, firstly relates to how we view our neighbours. It is a Christian virtue. It is a virtue that is then translated into good works through our individual actions and in our actions as employers and business managers. Then we move through the chain, through families, extended families, professional associations, community groups, schools, what we might call civil society, parishes, and so on. Then there is action through the political sphere. This has to be a last resort because it is coercive, it circumscribes the freedom and creativity of those trying to address social problems, and because government agencies cannot be as close to the problems that they are trying to solve as those who bind together in a voluntary capacity to help others. And Pope Benedict makes this so very clear, in fact, in his first encyclical, Deus Caritas Est. Now, if you look at the pronouncement of all UK Christian churches on economic matters, they have a strong tendency to balance the issues of subsidiarity and solidarity, and often conclude that the government is the vehicle for the pursuit of solidarity. And this is wrong. And nowhere is this misunderstanding of solidarity more clear than in the document Taxation for the Common Good, which was published by the Catholic Bishops of England and Wales, and in which the level of provision of state services is never seriously questioned, but simply justified in the name of solidarity. But how can anybody possibly argue that if we view action by the state in the economic sphere as a last resort, that the state should spend 47% of the average family's income, as it will in 2008 and 2009 in the UK? So the book takes these ideas of subsidiarity and solidarity and many other theological and economic concepts and applies them to economic issues such as taxation and welfare, the minimum wage, policies towards developing countries, the genuine problems of consumerism and materialism which do exist in capitalist economies, education, and so on. And in a practical way, the book critiques economic and social policies in these areas. But as well as an underlying theology, there is also an underlying economics in the book. One should not make pronouncements on economic matters unless one is sure that the policies one is promoting will have the beneficial consequences that one hopes for. And a good example here is the recent Make Poverty History campaign. The subject of development is covered in a chapter in the book. Church leaders and Christian schools have urged those in their charge to support this campaign without, it seems, giving any serious thought to the wider economic consequences of the policies that they are promoting. Now, not all the policies promoted by the campaign will necessarily be damaging, but I wonder how many of its supporters have separated and thought through the various different policy strands. So let's just take the issue of development aid, which, as I mentioned, is covered in one of the chapters in the book. It is a stark fact that after decades of aid programmes spending hundreds of billions of dollars, it is more or less impossible, if one sifts the economic evidence, to find a single example of a country that is developed as a result of aid. And there are good reasons for this. Whilst occasionally aid can be somewhat helpful in certain conditions, in the wrong conditions it can in fact be a serious hindrance to economic growth. It can hinder the development of good governance. And by raising exchange rates, it can hinder the development of labour-intensive export sectors. Government-to-government aid can, and indeed has, in many circumstances, caused more problems than it solves. So this is just one example of where one is often felt to feel almost unchristian if one doesn't follow the economic orthodoxy of the Christian establishment in the Western world. Yet the economic evidence leads us in a different direction, or at least should lead us to consider some wider issues. In fact, it's an irony that much modern economics actually incorporates a more Christian understanding of human nature than do many Christian pronouncements on matters of political economy. Christian pronouncements on matters of political economy often assume somehow that the government can pull certain levers and put right certain problems, as if somehow the people who are administering government programmes are omniscient, all-knowing and perfectible. In other words, they always act in goodwill and never in their own self-interest. And this point about modern economics perhaps understanding better the Christian understanding of human nature is perhaps best illustrated in the subject of what is known as public choice economics. Once one allows for the existence of self-interest within the political system and amongst bureaucrats and politicians, one should become much less confident that any problem one identifies within the market economy can be solved through political action. Ultimately, we must recognise the reality of the imperfectibility of man acting within the political sphere. Indeed, if politicians, regulators and bureaucrats had the best formed consciences possible, if we take a charitable view of human nature, although an unrealistic one, they are still not omniscient. They therefore cannot centralise the knowledge that resides in all the millions of economic actors within government. Modern economists, it seems, understand better than Christian commentators on economic issues the importance of humility about the role of government, knowing the limits of what can be achieved given human nature. Although, as I've mentioned, Pope Benedict has actually given this subject a fair airing in his own encyclicals and earlier writings. Finally, to redress the balance of argument amongst Christians who comment on economic matters is one thing. The authors also try to raise and to some extent answer constructive questions about how and when economic intervention by the government is appropriate to address economic problems. But good intentions are not enough. The phrase unintended consequences is so important in economics that if you Google unintended consequences and economics, you'll get something like 1,290,000 responses. It is frequently the case that the results of economic policies that we think might be appropriate are actually the reverse of those that we intended. It is not just the road to hell that is paved with good intentions. The road to poverty has often been so too. It may well be appropriate, for example, for governments of rich countries to try to assist poor countries in the process of development, or to raise the incomes of poor families. But the mechanisms which are used to achieve these objectives should be decided in the light of careful economic analysis.
It's often said that the European social model is built upon a combination, a compromise possibly, of Christian socialism and the more conservative Christian democracy. Solidarity is often mentioned, and the concept of subsidiarity was written into the Maastricht Treaty. Is this sort of system a good compromise between socialism and Anglo-Saxon capitalism?
Well, firstly, it's important to mention that we're not trying to promote any particular model of, say, US capitalism or Anglo-Saxon capitalism in the book. One should note that the US is a highly regulated society, and that under George Bush, both regulation and the size of government has increased, as I've already mentioned, in both the UK and the US. The parents have much less freedom with regard to the education of their children than they do in many of what are regarded often as more socialist societies of continental Europe. So we're trying to analyse and examine a number of particular important subjects in Catholic social teaching and their relationship to public policy, rather than to promote a particular model. But it always amuses me when we talk about the systems on continental Europe as being based on solidarity. In a socialist society, resources are allocated through bargaining in the political system, and we see the results of that in France today, and we saw the results of it in the 1970s in Britain. And the results are often quite violent, as one group goes out onto the streets to protest and campaign for more economic resources to be allocated to them, and then another group will go out onto the streets the following month to protest for more economic resources to be allocated to that group. And one good example of how this system really is completely misnamed as a system of solidarity is in the case of the huge public pension systems which exist on continental Europe. This is often described as solidarity between the generations, when what it really means is that one generation of older people vote themselves pensions which are going to be paid for by younger people, or perhaps by taxpayers who are not even born yet and certainly cannot vote. This isn't what solidarity is all about. In fact, one thing we try to make clear in the book is that Christians should be intrinsically attracted to a market economy, and a market economy is quite compatible with a genuine expression of the idea of solidarity. Christians should be intrinsically comfortable with the idea of a market economy because it involves distributing economic resources peacefully, by mutual agreement, by free contracting. And this is quite compatible with a Christian view of human nature, as John Paul II made clear in a number of his writings. Now, conflicts do arise in a market economy that is not, or an economy in a country which is not properly circumscribed by the rule of law. And then the powerful can often ride roughshod over the interests of the less powerful. And it's therefore vital that governments do actually fulfil their proper functions of having a framework of law and a good and effective legal system, and so on. And this is very clear in Catholic social teaching too. But this is a long way from these so-called models of solidarity which exist on continental Europe.
Do you believe that the Church should keep out of politics?
No, it shouldn't keep out of politics, but it should be careful in terms of the things which it says, which various churches say. Churches can warn politicians that they're not taking certain problems seriously enough, poverty or family breakdown, for example. And the Church must speak out when fundamental human rights are not being protected, the right to life being a good example there. The Church might indicate what types of policies should be considered, for example, income redistribution to help the poor. But representatives of the Church always should be very careful not to step out of their field of competence. And Pope Benedict has always been very good in this respect. Recently he has spoken out on issues to do with the environment, and almost certainly he will speak out again on that issue in the near future. And the warnings and the points that he makes should be taken very seriously by Christians. But he also makes it very clear that Christians should not allow their agendas to be taken over by interest groups, and that the particular solutions to environmental problems should be developed and understood with the aid of people who are specialists in the area and who understand the economic consequences of any action that is taken. Now, one of the problems when the Church goes outside this role of making general comments on economic and political matters is that they undermine their authority in fields where they really do have competence. As the Church herself puts it, clergy have no special knowledge or authority on the detail of economic and political matters and should not casually claim Christ's authority when teaching about them. And when clergy do speak out on these economic and political matters without obviously really understanding them and understanding the consequences of the policies they're promoting, they certainly undermine their teaching authority in those areas where they actually do have authority in the moral and theological sphere.